Good afternoon. My name is Todd Sanders, I'm President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's long-awaited launch of the Chamber's Diversity and Inclusion Program and Toolkit for Businesses. Having a diverse workforce brings new perspectives and ideas to your business, and prioritizing diversity and inclusion can help attract and retain top talent, which is a big concern for all of us these days. Implementing D&I strategies takes time and effort. So together with our committee of local experts, the Chamber created a comprehensive toolkit to help guide businesses in implementing their own D&I strategies. During today's program, we're going to hear from our committee members as they highlight elements of the toolkit and explain the steps needed to either get started or build upon your organization's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would like to begin by thanking our committee members, a team of professionals from across various industries who work within the D&I space. Together, they spent countless hours compiling resources, outlining best practices, and ultimately producing an excellent program that will help Arizona businesses build a more diversified workforce. Now, if you have any questions throughout this program, I want to urge you to please submit them using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll save time at the end for questions and get through as many as possible. Now, I'm pleased to introduce the Chamber's Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chair, Mr. Frank Reed, who's the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, also a current board member of the Phoenix Chamber, and Sarah Strunk, who's the Chair of Board of Directors for Fenimore Craig and also happens to be a former chair of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. I think you should know that Frank and Sarah are the two individuals who I credit with starting this important conversation at the Chamber with me, and they're the reason why we are here today. I can't thank them enough. Sarah and Frank are going to kick us off and give us some background on how the D&I idea for a D&I involvement at the Chamber started and kind of get the ball rolling from there. So with that, I want to welcome Frank and Sarah. Please take it away.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you very much. One of the things that you talked about was conversation. And one of the things I found in this type of work that I've experienced is the more honest your conversations are, the more you have a chance to really make an impact. And what I like to do is to share two points with you before I turn it over to Sarah, because these are very important for me. And I think when I look over the last 3 years, I've seen the remarkable growth of a conversation into action. But about 3 years ago, when Sarah was our chair at the board, it was my first year joining the board. We decided after one board meeting, my first board meeting, to meet for lunch. Several weeks passed and we decided to get together for lunch. And the day we happened to have met, it was preceded the day before by 5 police officers being shot and killed in Dallas during the Black Lives Matter protest. We both went to lunch. We both sat there. We were both very quiet. We both kind of started out chit-chatting, but we both had something on our hearts and our minds. And Sarah looked over that and asked me a very pointed question that took a lot of courage because it was about race relations. It was about how I personally felt about what happened. And she shared her perspective. And through that conversation, we realized that we had an obligation to try to do something, because what happened in Dallas could have happened in any one of the United States major cities. The long and short of it is that we talked, we were so moved by the need to take action that we decided to pull Todd in. And we called Todd, and Todd agreed to meet with us for lunch. And from there, fast forward, we're now rolling out the diversity and inclusion toolkit, which we think will be very useful in helping us to make an impact in the businesses here in the Valley. In addition to the toolkit, some of the work that Sarah had started to have us do as the chair of the board was to develop a Blue Council, where the business community started to work hand in hand with law enforcement and to try to help better relationships between communities of color and the police department. And all of those things kind of evolved under Sarah's direction as a chair. And we are very pleased with the work that we've started to do now. And this is just the next logical step for us. So that's how we got here. Why does it matter? I still hear people today say, why are we even talking about this? I just want to do my job. One, the job's changing. CEOs' jobs are changing. Your workforce is changing. And the three things I would just share with you before I turn it over to Sarah is one reason it matters is employee engagement. If your employees don't believe that you care about the same things that they care about, then they will never engage in your business and they will never be fully committed to your business. The second thing, uh, in order for companies to sustain growth and profitability, it is mandatory that their organization and their workforce reflect that of their customers. And the worst thing that can happen to an organization is for its customers to feel that it has lost touch with them as customers. And the third thing that I like to just mention is the whole issue, and I think Todd raises as well. The new workforces that are entering into the workplace are not going to be. They will not tolerate the lack of diversity, because to them, the statement, if we're not willing to commit to diversity, then they feel that we aren't committing to the new workforce in the workplace. So there's 1,000 other reasons why it matters, but those are three that I can think of off the top of my head. And I'm just grateful for Todd's leadership on the chamber to take on a project like this. I can't imagine a lot of other chambers in the United States taking on this initiative 3 years ago. I can't thank the people who I work with enough that started out with me, that are still with me, Amy, Sina, and Dora. Thank you very much for your time and your commitment. And thanks to the new members of the committee who are going to be looking, who we're going to look to carry this thing forward into the future. And with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Frank. And I am so delighted to be able to join you here today. I'm among one of my favorite organizations, the Chamber. Was very honored to be the chair, and among some of my very favorite people. Frank Reed will always, to my dying breath, be one of my favorite people because he gave me the most incredible gift, and that's a true, honest conversation without judgment about what this all means. I can't see the world through anybody else's eyes, but Frank helped me, and I hope that I helped him a little bit as well along the way. As Frank mentioned, when I became chair of the board of the chamber, we were usually the chair picks one special project, and this was our project that year. It seemed to me at the time and through discussions with others that diversity and inclusion needed to be addressed in a comprehensive way. As a private lawyer, I work with lots and lots of different clients, a broad range of clients, much like the existing members of the chamber. Some of them have lots and lots of resources to address any issue before them, and others have more limited resources. So we wanted this toolkit to be available to everyone who wanted to address the issue of diversity and inclusion in a real way. I'm a very much, as Frank will tell you, a glass half full person. He laughs at that because it's true. I think everyone is very well intentioned generally, but I'm also a planner. And I know, I always say, if it's not on my calendar, forget it, it's not going to happen. I know that if I don't have a concrete plan and an intentionality about what I'm going to do, then it doesn't generally happen. And that's the way it is. And so having a plan that we can implement, that we can put in place, is a way to actually make things better and make it work. So our toolkit was our desire to extend the reach of this very important work as broad as possible among the chamber members. And given Frank's vast experience in the HR world and leading these very efforts, I asked Frank to lead that effort to develop this toolkit. And thankfully, he said yes, even though he knew how much work that was really going to be, and it was. So Frank, we all owe you a great debt of gratitude for being that chair, and I appreciate it. So thanks for letting me join you today.
Well, Sarah, Frank, thank you for your leadership. You know, I don't think there are too many times in your career where there's something so catalytic occurs. And what I love about this effort is that a lot of times, you know, we as chamber staff and professionals love to sort of run with it, create it, and then hand it back. And in this case, we didn't do that. It's pretty unusual, and I think that made this product even better. So I really want to thank you for that, for both of you for that. What I want to do now is kind of have the rest of the D&I committee join us. And what they're going to do is they're going to highlight the four pillars of our new toolkit. So each member will briefly touch on the different elements of the toolkit and explain the importance behind those elements. So first up, we've invited Matt Clyde, who's the founder and chief strategist of Ideas Collide. Matt's commitment to enhancing diversity within his own company culture. And by the way, you got to go down there and see what I'm talking about. Really makes him a perfect fit for covering the toolkit's role of the culture section. So with that, Matt, take it away.
Well, thank you, Todd, and thank you, Frank, Sarah, for this opportunity to share and be part of this. Such an important toolkit and opportunity for us as a business community and here in the Valley. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everybody can see that without any problems. If not, someone tell me I've got an issue. So I want to start out as we talk about diversity inclusion and the importance of this. And one of the pillars being culture, and culture being key to this program and central to a lot of the content that's in the toolkit, that the idea of being inclusive, being diverse is truly your culture and the DNA of your brand. Your people are the DNA of your brand, and the people that make up your culture create that element and diversity for your organizations. So there's so much great content in the toolkit, and we really are grateful to the committee that put this together and the leadership from the chamber. I extracted some key ideas and learnings, both from our organization and from others that really capture what's in the toolkit. Don't want to go into too much detail in just a few brief minutes here, but I want to call out some key things that you can put forward as you go through the toolkit, or learnings that you can apply within your organization. And those are to really, as you're going through identifying culture related to diversity and inclusion, is to really take time to evaluate and define. We always constantly have to define and evaluate our cultures. They're living and breathing all the time. It's not something you put in, set up as a mission statement, or these are our values and then put in a box. It is living and breathing every single day of your company. So continue to evaluate and define that. Lead with your values and evaluate those. Use the toolkit and other tools like to educate and train and guide that with advisory teams and advisory members, because that's going to help elevate your culture even more and bring more voices to the table. And lastly, as leaders and as you go through this toolkit and listen to everybody today, I hope that we can listen and be vulnerable. That's something I've definitely learned in going through this experience and in working on this with our team and others. So just briefly sharing with you some of these elements that we want to share. One thing to really pull out of the culture element is to develop a culture statement. And I grabbed one from the toolkit from ADP and Laura Lynn's great organization. They have this as their culture statement, that each person counts at ADP. We believe the best ideas thrive in an inclusive environment that values diverse perspectives. That's why we make it the cornerstone of our one-of-a-kind culture. So they're up front and center defining what their culture is about. We've done similar here in our organization. We put this out front and center on our onboarding, and because it's living and breathing, then we use this all the time in team meetings and dialogues. So hopefully the toolkit can help you craft a statement similar to this. There's some steps to that, but in our culture statement, we really state that we want all team members to belong and contribute to the DNA of our brand, our culture, to further reach our purpose, which is to love the team, show customer love, give back, make an impact. And
Matt,
so
I don't think we're seeing that particular slide. I'm not sure if it's advanced or not. We're just seeing your initial slide. So I don't know if you can advance it. You're not in presentation mode.
okay, well, let's figure that out. I'm sorry about that, everybody.
No, you're good.
So there we have the ADP statement that I mentioned from ADP. And then if we go to the next, we should be able to hopefully see the example I gave from our organization that we want all members to belong and contribute. And then we extract our values as part of this as well in our culture statement. So some of our key values are tied to this, which is part of one of those steps and evaluations that you go through and really defining your culture as tied to diversity and inclusion. So moving along, as we look at this next component, is really to tie those values as much as possible so you can have that culture statement connect to your culture values, and also what we defined it in our organization as a culture formula. So this is part of what we say to all of our people to be part of this, is to really embrace this culture formula. We've been using this for many years. And if you look at this next slide, it kind of captures how we take the values, and then the next slide, just going quickly here, and really setting the formula for this is really making sure that the values and behaviors are real and relatable, all the way through some of the culture formula pieces is to develop that diversity inclusion in our efforts, an opportunity for all to belong. So we're making these statements consistently and very vocally in our organization to really make sure that the culture is alive and well and authentic, and that all people are participating. Just jump to a couple more slides here, and then I'm going to hand off to my other colleagues, but just wanted to mention the education, the training, and guiding that with all, and using advisory too as well. The toolkit is a great aspect to this, and the chamber, as you'll hear today, is going to be doing this on an ongoing basis. It's not just a one-time opportunity to connect and share. So I hope you embrace that as further way to educate, train, and advise in your culture. So let's look at some just quick tips here on culture investment. You can survey your team and use that to educate and train. It's really important in the culture aspect to train at all levels. And as you do that, you want to make sure it's safe, it's open, it's a dialogue that can be varied for input, participation, and really seizing on the opportunity. And something that we've done recently, and really have been proud of this in our organization, is that we've been guided to by not just internal people, but external as well, to help us make those best connections. Because really, if we want to build a culture that is diverse and we want a diverse company, we have to develop for the long term. And that means embracing our junior team, or embracing more people coming in that bring that diversity and that element of belonging for all. So these are just a few examples that we wanted to share. Look at the next slide. To connect this, again, continue to train at all levels. And then our next slide here is to listen and be vulnerable. Something I've definitely learned in our work and in our efforts is that it's going to be continuous disruption. We've seen that this week alone. And that's something that Frank mentioned is you have to be brave, open, and honest, and listening to your team members, your fellow employees and coworkers, and lead with empathy and understanding. That's got to be tied to your culture, and operate with an absence of ego as you do so. So I hope some of these elements help you find ways that you can navigate better in building a stronger culture of diversity and inclusion, and really leverage the toolkit that we have built with this team. So now it's my honor to turn over to my fellow committee members, Dora and Lashandra. Dora is the senior consultant from Solemn Consulting, and Lashandra is the vice president of client experience and operations for Quicken Loans. And they are going to share with us more about how to really work on unconscious bias. So I'm going to hand off to my committee members, Dora and Lashandra.
Thank you so much for that, Matt. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. You know, as Matt talks about the role of culture in our workplace, it's really important to understand the role that unconscious bias has on shaping our decision-making and ultimately our company culture. And when we're talking about unconscious bias, it's really the judgments, beliefs, or social stereotypes that we unconsciously attribute to a person or a group of people that often lead to favorable and unfavorable treatment. So if you think about it this way, you know, we all have our own life experiences and stories that shape not only how we see the world, but how we see other people in the world, and thus how we treat them and interact with them. And unconscious bias can really be a bit of a slippery concept, because for some of us, it's really difficult to grasp that our reactions and our judgments of others are happening outside of our consciousness, right? We tend to think that if I connect with someone, I know exactly why I connect with them. If I don't connect with them, I know I have a good idea of why I'm not connecting with them. But with unconscious bias, that's not always the case, because there are these unconscious cues that are getting triggered based on our own life experiences and our values that shape how we see people and how we interact with them. And, you know, as Dora and I were talking about this, that we thought that this was such an appropriate visual, because because it's really kind of like the way that your mind sees things and how you ultimately then react based on some of those unconscious beliefs or ideals. And with unconscious bias, it not only plays a part in our decision making and our personal relationships, but Dora is also going to talk a little bit about how unconscious bias can affect our decision making within the workplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Dora.
All right. Thanks, LaShondra. Now, these biases can influence many areas of business, including recruiting efforts. And this is the section in the toolkit that we focus in on more in depth. But in the toolkit, we do highlight the fact that we need a diverse pool of candidates. But oftentimes this requires a focus of uncovering your own biases. We know that everybody carries them. So when we look inward, we look at what are our own biases. We're trying to remove those biases so they won't get in the way of making the best hiring choices. For example, you tend to hire those of the same gender, or you tend to tune out those with foreign or regional accents, or maybe you feel uncomfortable around people with disabilities. Those are just those biases we carry with us. So in our toolkit, under the leadership section, we work on focusing on those unconscious biases. So it is worth the effort to uncover your own biases. Once they are out in the open, you will be able to consider whether your image of the perfect candidate is affected by a particular preference rather than the actual qualifications and competencies needed for a position. And you'll be able to judge your candidate on their individual merits rather than their own conscious or unconscious responses to their characteristics. A good place to start, and something that we've used at our company, is identifying your biases through the implicit association test. And they cover topics such as age, gender, sexuality, and disability. These are really a really great starting point for all of you. The other thing we want to just talk through is part of that effort is to select an inclusive interview teams. And we talked about that with Matt, so I'm not going to go into too much depth in that. But really wanting you to understand that we have to promote awareness. So I'm going to hand it back to Lasana so she can share a little bit about that.
So as Dora mentioned, this work is very much so a lot of self-reflection, right? I like to think of it as inside out. And as leaders, when we talk about promoting awareness for unconscious bias, it's also, top down. It starts with the leadership team. And within the toolkit that we're launching, we've actually listed out 10 ways that will effectively help you promote awareness around unconscious bias. And so Dora and I wanted to talk through some of those 10 steps now. So first, learn as much as possible about unconscious bias and ways to combat it. Within the toolkit, there are a number of links to resources that will give you educational information about unconscious bias, ways to identify it, and then also what to do with it once you've identified it. Second, tell your story and listen to the stories of others. As leaders, I think one of the most important things that we can do is be vulnerable about our stories and who we are and how it shapes who we are as individuals and also as leaders. But it's equally important to make sure that we're creating the space for all of our team members to do the exact same thing. Third, avoid stereotypes and overgeneralizations. And I'll also align that with our fourth tip, which is separate facts from feelings. It's very easy to get wrapped up into, making overgeneralizations because of that one time, that one thing happened, or that one story that you heard, but really trying to step away from some of those one-off scenarios and really thinking about the broader picture to make sure that we're not, creating stereotypes, or we're not operating under stereotypes or overgeneralizations. And then also have a diverse group of people at the decision-making table. When we have a diverse group of people at the decision-making table, it evokes diversity in thought, which allows us to get to more creative and innovative solutions because we are thinking about our problems and thinking about our opportunities from a broader perspective, which allows us to actually really source more creative ways to address those. So it's super important to make sure that we've got diverse representation and diversity in thought when we're making critical business decisions.
And number 6 is reinforcing what we've already talked about, engage in self-reflection to uncover those personal biases. And number 7, develop safe and brave spaces to discuss unconscious bias. There's a lot of information out there. Brene Brown is one of those folks that really talks with a deeper dive around this, but sensible belonging starts with either and requires vulnerability. So really taking a deeper dive and building that safe and brave space. Number 8, be an active ally. An ally takes the time to read, listen, watch, and deepen understanding first. And having a learning mindset will definitely support those efforts. Number 9, don't expect a quick fix. This is not what is it, a marathon? More of a sprint, or is it the other way around? Did I get that turned around there? I did put in here, this is a sprint, not a marathon. We must take small changes to impact large change. And then number 10, practice empathy. Talk to new people, try out someone else's life, really walking in their for shared cause. Okay, so now we're going to pass it back to LaShondra.
Thank you so much, Dora. I hope that this information about unconscious bias has given you a little bit more information. Definitely check out the toolkit. There's much more links for resources as well to help you as you become more aware of unconscious bias and how to navigate through that in your organizations. So next up, to cover the role of employees pillar in the toolkit is committee member Laura Lynn Smith. Laura Lynn is the Divisional Vice President and General Manager for ADP's Tempe location. Welcome, Laura Lynn.
Thank you so much, LaShonda. Thanks to both you and Dora. Go ahead and share. Is everyone able to see the slide that reads about the role of the employees? Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And again, great discussion so far. I think what's important to recognize is when we think about diversity and inclusion, really at the foundation of all of that is who we are as humans. And our greatest human capital asset is our employees. So the role of the employees in the D&I initiative is very, very important. So when you think about, is everyone able to still see the PowerPoint presentation? Great. So when we think about the role of the employees, we first have to understand, why is it really important? And when we think about employees, they need to have a clear understanding of our diversity and inclusion goals, and so that they can feel very connected to the overall initiative and feel that they have a stake in the game. Employees who feel that they can be authentic at work are nearly 3 times more likely to say that they're proud to work for their company. And employees who feel they can be their authentic selves are also 4 times more likely to say that they are empowered to do their best work. So there is a very strong ROI involved in why we would want to engage our employees in the entire D&I effort. A great way to do this is through employee resource groups, which really are groups to celebrate the diversity and create an inclusive environment for all of the employees. There's many different ways to start an employee resource group. We'll talk in a moment about leadership, but once we have leadership buy-in, employees really can run with creating many of the ERGs, and there's many different tools that we outline in the toolkit to help celebrate the diversity of our employees, such as employee spotlights, doing community activities together, community involvement, also celebrating, different months that might be highlighted for that specific group, and hosting activities that are open to everyone. One of the best benefits of having employee resource groups is collaboration as well amongst ERGs. It's rare to have multiple ERGs and people just feeling like they only align with one. As humans, we're very multifaceted. So once there's a number of different ERGs, it can be very helpful to create allyships amongst ERGs, and hence allyships amongst all of the different employees as well. Leadership support is incredibly important in the overall involvement of employees. Leaders really help create the environment where employees feel that they can express themselves and where they can have transparency and do so with confidence. So leadership buy-in can be very important, and also leadership sponsorship of the ERGs can be very important. Leadership can also help assess company needs and set goals. It's highly recommended that the ERGs are involved in setting those goals so that they can be realized and achievable. And sometimes, depending where a company is on the overall spectrum, it may be helpful just to start small, maybe just with a couple ERGs that associates are passionate about. It's very important as you're starting ERGs that they really represent what is important to the employees in the company. In the toolkit, you'll also see several different tools and tips to help drive the change in the organization, also have really crucial conversations and have real discussions about diversity and inclusion. And we also provide a couple tips around how to approach the discussion, create vision, and communicate effectively. So at your leisure, you'll have a chance to review the toolkit, and you'll see that we do include a number of tips in there for you. And then measuring success can be very important for an overall D&I strategy, and looping in the employees. There's many different ways to measure success, like employee surveys, maybe having diverse hiring panels, creating diversity metrics that are part of your key performance indicators, as well as retention metrics. So there's many different ways to measure your overall effectiveness of your D&I strategy and engaging your as employees and your employee resource groups, such as measuring the number of members of your employee resource groups or as a percentage of population. So in the toolkit, you'll find many different ways to help measure success and really set your company up for having an effective ERG strategy overall. And I'm excited to introduce our next committee member, Amy Senna, Director of Administrative Services at State Farm Insurance, to cover our final pillar of the toolkit, talking about recruiting. So welcome to our committee member, Amy.
Thank you, Laura Lynn. And I'm gonna share my screen here. And I'll start by saying, if anyone here was surprised to find out or hear that recruiting is the last pillar that we talk about in the D&I strategy, you're surprised that it wasn't the first thing, you're probably not alone. But I hope that what you've seen through the presentation so far is that really you have to have the culture and the foundation within the company to support a D&I program before we can really get to recruiting those diverse candidates that you may be seeking. And so one of the first steps in the recruiting space is just have a really intentional diversity strategy. So it's important to know, who your target customer base is, what the makeup of your community looks like, so that you can understand maybe where you might have some gaps or some opportunities where you want to increase diversity within your staff. And then from there, you can set goals and monitor metrics, keeping in mind that a diversity and inclusion recruiting strategy includes all phases of the employee life cycle. So it's attraction, hiring, and then retaining those diverse employees. And that's where that culture and that practice of, the education around unconscious bias and having those established employee resource groups and those resources are really critical to being able to retain a diverse workforce. And then, let's see. All right, I might be behind on my slides. So when we think about attracting a diverse workforce, I kind of think of it as, what story do we tell externally about our company? What is it that people think of when they hear the name of our company? And now there's so many ways that we can advertise that through websites, through social media, just different avenues. And it's important to make sure that the focus on diversity and in creating an inclusive environment where all employees can be their authentic selves and thrive in the company comes through in what you're sharing. So even things like job listings can make an impact. I know words matter, and word choice or layout can inadvertently affect the way some people might feel about a certain job opportunity. So just being mindful of how your company might be portrayed or perceived, and being culturally sensitive to that is so important. And there's a lot of resources that can help us with that. We've already talked about the work environment a little bit, but that's just another piece of the strategy, and what you want to highlight about your company is that, how is it conducive to a lot of different types of employees? What are the range of amenities or benefits available that could appeal to different employee segments? And of course, it's always important to provide diversity training as an ongoing part of that company culture too, because it's not a one and done, it's a journey, and continuing to grow and learn together in that space is so important. When it comes to actually hiring diverse candidates, some of this was already referred to, but there's a lot of resources that we can tap into to reach diverse communities, churches, cultural institutions, nonprofits. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be creative in how we can reach maybe in a different candidate pool than we have traditionally. And then one thing I just wanted to highlight too, because I thought this was a really interesting statistic, is this concept of a two in the pool effect, that basically says if you have one diverse candidate in your pool when you're hiring, that person has virtually zero chance of being hired. But just by having at least 2 diverse candidates in your pool dramatically increases the likelihood of having a diverse hire. So it's just important to have good diversity within the pool, and also good diversity on the interviewing panel, which I think was mentioned already as well, but it's just, that brings that different viewpoints, different perspectives, and it really helps as a way to mitigate that unconscious bias by having more different viewpoints in the room. And since we've already talked about unconscious bias, I just want to move to the measures of success, because like any company initiative, it's important to know how you're doing and if the efforts that you've put into place are giving you the return that you're looking for. And so there's a lot of different potential metrics that are outlined in the toolkit, so you can take a look at those, and they're targeted at all the pieces of the program that I mentioned: the attraction, hiring, promotion, and retention. And what I'll end with quickly too is just that it's important to stay flexible and adapt as needed to monitor where you're getting good results and where you might want to make some adjustments based on feedback that you're getting from employees, feedback that you're getting from candidates, and as you're continuing to evaluate the culture in your organization, that may drive some different needs as well. And so that is recruiting in a nutshell, and I hope that this was able to give you a sense of why each of the different elements in the D&I toolkit are so essential for businesses to take into consideration. And now that we've covered all this, some of you might be wondering, so how in the world do we even get started with something like this? So I'm really excited to introduce our next committee member, Carmen Jandasek. She's the Director of Ethics Office and Total Rewards, HR Operations and Technology for APS. And Carmen's going to be sharing some tips on how and where to get started in implementing your own D&I workplace strategy. So take it away, Carmen.
Thank you so much, Amy. Let me just go ahead and share my slide here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk to you about, putting these concepts in motion. We work hard at APS every day to grow our D&I competencies at our 130 plus year old company. None of you would be here today, be attending this webinar if you didn't understand the importance of D&I to your organization and to ensure you have representation and reflect the communities where you live and you serve your customers. So how do you go about getting these efforts off the ground? First of all, write your strategy, vision, and goal statement. This vision and support has to come from the top of your organization, and it needs to have a strong narrative that resonates throughout the organization and ties to strong business outcomes. Get in and assess your culture. In the toolkit, you'll see a number of different resources that we are providing to assist you with that assessment. Compare the strategy you wrote against the vision and goal of your current culture. Conduct listening sessions. Determine what is your point of departure and what does good look like when you've arrived at the culture that you want to cultivate. Where are you on the D&I maturity spectrum? Do you have a strong compliance environment, but you're looking to move more to a competitive advantage? What are your values? How does that align to the culture you're looking to build and to bring to life? So all things surrounding assessing your kind of point of departure and where you sit today and the gap going to where you want to be. Choose what your business priorities are. There's a lot of work that all of us can do in the D&I spectrum. And what you need to do is start with small wins and gain momentum. So maybe it's reviewing your policies and procedures with an eye on diversity and inclusion to make sure you have no systemic issues. Could be a diverse hiring panel. Could be anchoring welcoming and belonging as a value. Better employee recruiting and sourcing to ensure diverse pools like Amy just talked about in pipelines. Diverse supplier programs, community involvement and support. Diverse customer forums, so you're listening to what your customers' needs are and the diversity of your customers also. Standing up employee resource groups. These are just a sampling of dozens and dozens of initiatives that you can do, and you need to carefully select and ensure that you are pacing it from an implementation perspective at a cadence that your organization can absorb. Identify resources, right? Internal, external, allies, sponsors, people that will help you nudge the culture, advocates, people that are evangelists in this space, right? You want to surround yourself with people that are open, welcoming, and talking through the importance of diversity and inclusion, people that are going to help be accountable in this space, take ownership, and be responsible for bringing that culture to life. Create a timeline. And this is really important, determining where you can make forward progress and the timeline that you can make that progress, right? You can't accomplish everything within your first 12 months. This is a journey. This is something that you're constantly getting better at, measuring and repeating, right? Create space for your organization to absorb the change, leaning into it and allowing the organization to breathe. I always say a company needs to inhale and exhale with change. This can be a lot of change at one point in time. And so it's really important that you don't overwhelm. When people become overwhelmed, they will check out and they will fail to continue to keep learning. So you want to make sure your pace is right for what your organization can absorb. Socialize the why. One of the most critical things in ensuring successful implementation is making sure that up and down your organization at every level with every employee, they understand what the why is. Why are we doing this work? Why is this work important? If you do not do that socialization, employees will fill in the blank with the incorrect narrative, and that will end up working against what you're trying to accomplish. So, understanding, embracing, and upholding your values of D&I once you started this journey for your organization, that's really the price of entry, that you are really socializing with employees that this is the new way that you're doing business. But you can't underestimate that importance of talking about it again, and ensuring it's a very repeatable narrative that resonates with people. Be a voice and a continuous learner. Every single day, I learn something new. Be curious. I always tell people, get to curious. When you get to curious, you're constantly going to be learning and growing and helping with your organization's cultural competency. This is a journey, not a destination. And if you're doing it right, you are learning every single day. And then you're going to measure, you're going to adjust, and you're going to repeat, and you're going to get better at it every single time that you do it. So although these are just some discrete points from an implementation perspective, there is a wealth of other things that you can be doing. And I just gave you a sampling of these things today. But now I would like to turn it back over to Todd for our Q&A session.
Well, Carmen, thank you so much for this and to the rest of the members of our committee. I will tell you, and I'm so glad that you mentioned pacing, because I was getting sweaty palms. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to do this. And it's like, I have to do it all right. And no, you don't, because we're going to do this too. We're doing this at the chamber. It's so important. But I'm so glad you gave me permission to pace this. And I think the folks watching, it's easy to get overwhelmed because it's such a big topic. But I think to your point, this is something that all of a sudden people get excited about, and it starts to change sort of what you look like internally and externally. So appreciate all of you for giving us a glimpse. As we mentioned, if you would like to submit a question through the Q&A box, feel free to do so. We actually do have a few, so I'm going to quickly go to one of them. And let me get to it here one second. What's the best way to determine adequate budgets for ERGs? And I guess maybe I guess Laura Lynn spoke to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it really depends on what initiatives you are going to have for the ERGs. It's probably best, once an ERG forms, to have some type of leadership in that ERG where they can outline, here's what it is that we'd like to accomplish, and then meet with leadership to determine what is feasible and also plan some type of ROI as well, from the investment.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's sort of a case by case. And I think Carmen talked about getting some allies and some people that can help mentor you through this process. It's a good way to do that. There's another question about the slides. We are going to make the slides available to you. I know I asked my team the same thing, so we will make sure we get them out to you as well. There was another question that we got in the chat that from the perspective of the idea that there are very few women of color that get to advance in leadership role, and most either get stuck in middle management or leave the industry. What can we do to help these professionals break the glass ceiling? And we'll throw that out to any member of the group here that might want to tackle that.
No, hey, it's LaShondra. I would be happy to throw some thoughts in about that. I think when we talk about, promotion, I think one of the things that it's important to look at is what are your processes when you are promoting people? And even before then, what type of mentorship initiatives do you have that are really geared towards activating your talent force and creating an environment where they have the support that they need and the resources that they need in order to be prepared for these opportunities? And I think I saw in the chat where someone had mentioned, incorporating the diversity, equity, the E and DE&I. And I think that is where the equity comes in, really taking a look at your processes around critical functions like promotions, hiring, and really determining whether or not you have a process that fosters some fairness and equity in that decision making. So I definitely think starting out with mentorship, what are we doing to get that talent force activated and to get them prepared? And then also looking at your processes to make sure that the way that you are promoting is an inclusive way rather than just kind of hand picking people who you may be more familiar with.
Thank you for that. And let me follow up with another. There was another more of a comment talked about, that you need to have a diverse group of folks that are in positions of leadership, because sometimes if they're not, all of a sudden, they're sort of there's a spotlight put on folks and they don't necessarily have a voice in that. So what about having a diverse group of leaders in leadership, aside from the idea that we get better ideas coming out of that, how can that help folks that are coming up the ranks?
I'll chime right back in with that one again. I think representation is important. One of the things that I think I've seen very, very early on is that when people don't see themselves represented, they start to self-select out of the process, right? Oh, this is a good old boys club. They'll never let a female into this role. So it is so important that as we're growing our talent force and growing our leadership bench, that people see themselves represented, so that they don't self-select out and kind of cut themselves right off before even trying to move forward with advancing their career.
Thank you for that, Chandra. There's another, please go ahead.
This is Frank, and just to add to that comment that was just made by both of you, I think the adage that we hear a lot is if you can't see it, you can't be it. So that's the message for our entrance in the workplace. And that was what Lysandra was talking about, the self-selecting out. But just to share real briefly a story, because the other word I like to leave the group with, and I've heard it twice already today, is intentional. Intentional is huge, because the problem you have if you're not intentional, you will unintentionally do something you don't want to do. So you have to be intentional. And the reason I think it's important, years ago, I worked in a job where we interviewed 6 women, MBA candidates, to come join our company. All 6 turned us down. And when we met as a management team to talk about it, all of my managers and colleagues all had reasons why we just probably picked six bad. There were just 6 bad selections. I called each one of those young ladies and asked specifically, why did you turn us down? And they had lots of different reasons, but they all had one common reason. And they said that when we interviewed at your corporate headquarters, we didn't see anybody interviewing us that looked like us. And I thought how funny that was, because 67% of our leadership team was female. But at the time we had the people in the office for the interviews, our female executives were with customers, with clients, they were with lunches, they were doing presentations. So they had someone on their staff do it who happened to be men. Because we were not intentional, we missed an opportunity to gain some talent. And they left the organization with the wrong perception of our company, because we were not intentional in showing them that we had a group of people that leading the company that looked the way they looked. So intentionality is huge.
Well, thank you for that, Brent. And you got some kudos in the chat for that. I think that is a very important point. And speaking of intentionality, metrics, you really need to be intentional with metrics. So how can an organization measure their success in creating a diverse workforce through metrics? And maybe some of you can talk about what are some of the metrics you use in your organizations to ensure that you're being successful in what you're trying to do, or at least track it. And I'll throw that out to the group. Go ahead, Dora.
Great, that's a really good question. As a matter of fact, at Solon Consulting, we had a leader who said we should look like the community that we're in. And so we used Maricopa County data and demographics and said, okay, how much of the population is females and male? How much of the population is of those different groups, minority groups? And how can we start providing metrics of what is our goal, right? If that's our goal, how are we going to meet that goal? And what are we doing through recruiting, with leadership, with other aspects of our business to make sure that we're aligning with that goal? Thank you.
Yeah, it is an incredibly important thing. And I think someone mentioned the fact that this is an evolving type of activity. And so as your program evolves, your metrics are probably going to be changing. But I think that's such a great way of looking at it. Thank you, Dora. Let me just throw out to the group, D&I can be a priority for companies. How can D&I be a priority for companies when businesses have other issues to deal with, such as market risk, tightening budgets, highly competitive industry? Maybe for Carmen, Lysandra to chime in, why should they care right now about this?
Sure, I'm happy to give my opinion on this. So when you look at creating a competitive Arizona, when you look at creating companies that you want to be able to compete and attract and retain employees, you can't afford not to be doing this. You have to be leading in this space because you, as an organization, will be significantly left behind. This is incredibly important to employees when they're selecting who to partner with their career. And if they don't see themselves, if they don't see programs that are creating an environment for them to be successful and bring their full selves to work, they are going to go to your competitor to do so. So it's become a competitive advantage to have these programs in place. And frankly, all of the research comes back to show that as from a revenue and a profitability perspective, having diversity and inclusion as an active presence in your organization is creating a leading advantage for you as an organization.
Thank you for that. I think as all of you were speaking, one of the things that occurred to me was you as the leader might think this is the great thing. I really want to do this, but how do you get the entire company, including your leadership team and board, as well as rank and file, on board with this and with starting down the road of diversity and inclusion? What do you need to do? Because I think if it's, well, we have to do this because we're being told to do it, that's not necessarily the way to go. Versus, hey, this is the right thing for us to do, and it's good for everybody. That's obviously a different conversation. So how do you start those conversations? And maybe that's a culture question. And Matt, you covered culture, and maybe I'll ask you if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, where Carmen and others have shared today. It's making sure everybody feels a sense of this can go at your own pace. You don't want to force this on anybody in any means, but it's also important to be very mindful that you have coworkers that deeply care about it, and you can't also put it aside and say we'll deal with it another time. So it go back to the word of intentional. Do we have the right intentions, and how do we really bring those forward to really have honest conversations? One thing we've done that I'm really lucky that I got to work with the committee, and some of them advised me on this, is we helped select a member of our team to be an advisor to our executive team and to help elevate their voice more in the organization. And we also compensated them for that. We didn't just say, hey, we're giving you this opportunity. We also added the compensation, which is really important in as you start to bring more diverse members of your team and people of color into those roles. Is it doesn't become a token. It's something that really everybody's coming together to work towards, and you do need some of those advisors to help you get through that. So that's how some of our leaders have felt more comfortable in that, by bringing in the right players to help us move forward and getting on board and meeting people. The last thing I'd say to that is meeting people, knowing that everybody is on that different pace. So wherever we often use this phrase, and our leader and advisor on diversity and inclusion has used this a lot, is wherever you are, start there, have that conversation there, and bring people along from where they are and help them grow, because we're all coming at this from different backgrounds, experiences, exposures. And so I think if you have that openness and sense of trust and honesty and mindfulness, you can bring a lot of people along, even though they're on different paths and journeys of where they're at in diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Matt. And I think that's one of the first things that Frank taught me, that not everyone is where you are, and you have to realize that. And it was sort of startling, but absolutely correct. We're pretty much out of time, but I really want to go around quickly. And I know this is hard, but what I'd like to do is ask each of you on a personal level, what's been the impact of diversity, inclusion, and equity? I know I've got some chats on this. What's it had on you? What's the impact been on you? And I'm just looking at my tiles. Amy, can you start us off? What's the impact been on you?
Yeah, real quickly, I'll say, I think our focus on diversity and inclusion and equity has just really strengthened relationships amongst people in our company, and built that trust that leads to so many other positive impacts. But just that recognition that we are all affected by what's happening in our society. We're all affected in different ways, but we have that in common. And so how can we learn from each other and kind of grow together through that? It's just been really impactful. And I think it's made a very positive difference when we all are, again, intentional to be vulnerable and admit we don't know everything and we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to learn. We want to learn from each other, and we want to support each other.
Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go next to you, Frank. Some quick thoughts.
Yeah, just real quick. I think that the key for me is when I think a lot about this whole area, and I see what's happening socially in our country, the more I just keep getting back to the same place, and that is, there is no plan B for not getting this right. There is no plan B. This is it. We are all we got. And we've got to figure this thing out. And it's hard and it's difficult, but it doesn't make it impossible. But there is no plan B. There is no dividing the country up in the 25 states. There's no self-deportations. This is it. We got to sort this out.
Thank you, Frank. Matt?
On a personal level, I would say I've always felt like I was very aware and aligned and in tune, but I wanted to approach it from an organic point of view. And, learning from Frank and members of my own team and others, I've learned that you have to be far more intentional and have to have a more concentrated, organized effort. And I think the toolkit is a great start for many people who are afraid to maybe jump in. I think it's okay to be vulnerable. And I've learned that not over the years, but especially in the last year or two of, I don't have all the answers, but I'm really willing to listen. And I've learned amazing experiences from individuals that have just been open and honest by just kind of tearing down those walls and just listening to one another. And I think that's part of what Frank's point was just now is we all have got to solve for this. And one of the best ways to solve for it is listening and just caring for one another. So that would be some of my personal experience from this.
Well said. Thank you very much. Carmen?
Pretty seismic. It really has allowed us to unleash our talent, to welcome our talent, to ensure that they feel like they belong and can contribute on day one. That has taken a lot of work and effort to get us to that point in time. And we're continuing to learn and continue to be better in that space. But I certainly echo with what Frank said. We have got to get this right, and we have to continue to keep iterating and being okay to fail. Sometimes we're going to do something that we're going to fail, and we're going to go back and we're going to do it better again. And that's absolutely what the journey of learning is all about.
Thank you so much. And it is seismic. I couldn't agree more. Dora?
I would say empathy is one of the things that I was looking for when I was working on the DNI. So really being able to hear from others' perspectives and folks listening to my perspective. And the other one I would say, I get a seat at the table, and I haven't had an opportunity to do that in a lot of the work that I've done in the past. This is a great opportunity both here with the chamber, but also in my company. So having that opportunity has been really life-changing.
Well, we are very happy that you have a seat at our table. Laura Lynn?
Yeah, I think, through all of this, what I've recognized and realized is how much I actually have to learn. And I've made a commitment to myself to continue to educate myself, with something new every month, whether it be a movie, an article, a podcast, just continue to immerse myself and learn more about what diversity and inclusion really means and how I can help create a more inclusive environment.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
I couldn't agree with the comments more. I think the issue of listening, understanding, and caring about each other has been the most impactful thing. Long ago when I started this work, I thought you did it because it's the right thing to do. I still think it's the right thing to do, but I was chastised by someone who was a professional in this area and said, when you sell it at your company, it has to be more than just the right thing to do. It has to be about the business and how important it is to the whole thing. And that's what this committee talks about, is how important it is to our workforce and our customers. But again, it's the right thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. LaShondra?
I think, fostering the environment of diversity and inclusion for me, it has really allowed me to broaden my lens about how I lead my people. I think that there's something very powerful about shared storytelling to really understand the perspectives, the experiences that our team members and our leaders within our organizations are having that are shaping how they show up every day. And, it has meant so much for my leadership to know that I'm not only encouraged, but this is a part of the role to create this space. It is a requirement to create this space for your team members and for your leaders to not only be able to feel like they can show up in an environment and be their authentic self, but that it's also welcome and that it is at the root of how we will get better as an organization. So it has, it's been huge for my leadership and my ability to lead my people effectively.
Thank you. Absolutely. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And we as a chamber, we never go overtime. Today was, we never do. Today was an exception to that rule. This was really important and powerful, I think, for all of us. I want to also thank our attendees for joining us. And we are dedicated to continuing to lead the way when it comes to this initiative. We're going to have continued progress on this work, and we look forward to continuing that with you. We encourage you to join us for our first quarterly meeting, our forum, Diversity and Inclusion Forum on Tuesday, it's on May 19th at 9:30 a.m. I'm not sure exactly of the day because we changed it. Following today's event, you can join us as our committee members, host conversational sessions, and answer some of your questions. And I know there were some questions we couldn't get to, but we would love to have you join us on the 19th. At 9:30 for this next forum. Other than that, we're going to be we'll be sending out the toolkit. There was obviously some links that went out today, but we'll be launching that on our website, and you can certainly see it there. Please do get in contact with us if there's anything we can do. We're going to be on the journey with you, so we're excited to do that. And with that, I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.